Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, September 28th, 2022. Hurricane Ian making landfall along the southwestern coast of Florida as a near Category 5, bringing raging wind, rain, and storm surge. Officials using words like dangerous, catastrophic, and nasty. We'll hear the latest from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, plus the FEMA administrator on the state and federal preparations and response. Also, President Biden calling on Florida residents to heed the warnings from officials about the hurricane, and also warning U.S. energy companies against using the hurricane as an excuse to raise gas prices. President Biden today hosting the first White House conference on hunger and food insecurity since President Nixon did in 1969. President Biden setting a goal of ending hunger in the U.S. by 2030. We'll talk about it with Politico's food and agriculture policy reporter Meredith Hill. White House today also asked why President Biden appeared during that conference to be searching the audience for a member of Congress who died last month. And the State Department reacts to the announcement of Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine voting to leave Ukraine and become part of Russia, saying the U.S. will never acknowledge these sham referenda as legitimate. And we start with Hurricane Ian. It did make landfall on the west coast of Florida as a strong Category 4, top winds of 150 miles per hour. That is just short of a Category 5. Combined with the very heavy rain, the storm surge that could be over 10 feet, and the catastrophic flooding, there could also be possible tornadoes. Millions of Floridians ordered to evacuate as the hurricane approached. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been holding multiple news conferences today around his state, as he has in the past couple of days. He started this morning at the Emergency Operations Center in the capital city, Tallahassee. Reporter asked him about Hurricane Ian compared to powerful storms that have hit Florida in the past.
There is a lot of rain and flooding and substantial storm surge associated with this storm. Does it make it different than storms we've had in the past? Because I believe, Director Guthrie, last night you said there's going to be a great humanitarian lift that's going to be needed after this, especially considering some people may not have flood insurance, and that may be the biggest issue for a lot of them. So are there special preparations that you guys are taking for this storm that you maybe haven't taken in the past?
Well, I would say, and I think Kevin would agree, in terms of the resources that have been staged, we prepared for Dorian. That came very close. That was a Category 5. That was massive. That was a massive mobilization that we did. We were ready if that would have hit Florida. This has been bigger in terms of the mobilization. I mean, the assets that we have are unprecedented in the state's history. And unfortunately, I mean, they're going to need to be deployed because this is a really, really significant storm. In terms of how people in the aftermath who have damage, so one of the things with the flood insurance is there's folks that are told, hey, if you're not in a flood zone, you don't need flood insurance. And so people buy homes and they don't get it. But the fact is that there are places outside of, quote, flood zones where you absolutely, in an event like this, could be impacted. So FEMA does have programs that can offer support, but the FEMA's support is not going to be equal to what you would have gotten in a flood insurance policy. And so that's going to be something that we're going to have to look very seriously at in terms of what the impacts are of that. There's a lot of folks that have a homeowner's policy, and sometimes they're told that could also be for flood, and those are just different policies. The homeowners is from the wind, direct storm damage, the flood insurance obviously from rising waters. There will be debates in people's policies about, okay, you had a Cat 4, maybe even a 5 hit. Yes, your home got flooded, but is that also direct storm damage and not flood? And can your homeowner insurance? So that'll be good. I know Jimmy will be involved in doing that to try to help Florida consumers. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of fallout from this in terms of getting people back on their feet. But that's why we've done the mobilization that we've done. Right now, it's about safety. I think most Floridians made the proper precautions to keep themselves safe. The ones that didn't, that may end up in harm's way, there's a lot of assets that are staged, and those are going to be deployed because we want to help people. I mean, even if they made a different decision, we're all in this together, going to do that. Once that kind of life-saving part of the operation is concluded, it's all about getting people back on their feet. And there may be some people that had nothing more than just losing power, but that's important to get them back to normalcy. There's others that may have really significant structural damages to their residence. They're going to need assistance, and so all of that will be part of what will be really an unprecedented effort in the history of the state. I'm going to be traveling into North Central Florida today to be able to meet with a lot of the linemen that we have staged. I think it's important to just thank them for what they're doing, because their quick response, be able to help get people back on the grid, really helps with the entire response effort. You know, if you have everyone no power for weeks on end, like we have had in other storms, you know, that makes everything else that we're doing difficult. I mean, I've been through these storms, you know, prior to being in elected office, and it's like, okay, you know, the power is going to go out, but then after a while, you know, people just start to get antsy. It's human nature. And so the fact that they're here in really huge numbers, ready to go down and descend, they're not only doing their job, they're performing a public service for us. So we're appreciative of that, and we're going to thank them for that, and we will get them deployed. Kevin, FDOT, they're going to make sure that those roads get cleared as soon as possible. Now, some of that is going to be very, very difficult, because you're going to have a lot of debris. You're going to have a lot of trees. I mean, just think Hurricane Michael. There were some places, Category 5, I mean, it's like the whole forest came down almost on some of these roads. This is knocking on the door of that, and it's going to cause a lot of damage. And so that's going to be a huge priority. It's going to take a lot of manpower, but we're going to use the resources that we need to get it done.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis at the Emergency Operations Center in the capital city, Tallahassee, early this morning. He then did go around the state holding numerous briefings as the hurricane came ashore. The administrator of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, Deanne Criswell, also talking about the mobilization and pre-positioning of resources to help along the hurricane's path, saying that the federal responders have been moved into position, along with fuel and generators and food and water supplies. Mr. Criswell also issuing warnings about staying safe if you're riding out the storm. She said these are life-saving messages that simply cannot be ignored. The tips are available at their website at FEMA.gov. Mr. Criswell holding a news conference at FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. today. One of the questions from a reporter was about the sizable elderly population in Florida.
Administrator Criswell, how many FEMA personnel are in place in Florida? And Florida is home to an older population. We can all remember the image of nursing home residents during Harvey trapped in floodwater. Can you speak to any special considerations for senior citizens sheltering in place, as well as some of that coordination with nursing homes and senior living facilities?
Yeah, absolutely. We have hundreds of personnel in the state already, embedded in the State Emergency Management Center, as well as staged in places like Miami, as well as in Orlando and other parts. But we also have personnel that are staged in Atlanta, Georgia at our regional office that are ready to move in. As the storm passes and we see where the needs are, we are just going to continue to move people in. That number is going to rise significantly over the following days, and to make sure that we have the resources in place to support the people that have the needs. I know that this, I believe, I was talking with Gail, 30% of the population is over the age of 60 in many of these impacted areas. We know that that's going to be a significant concern. When I talked to Governor DeSantis on Friday and asked him what his concerns were, that was one of his concerns. I think that's why we've put in place this really robust search and rescue capability across the federal government to complement the amazing efforts that the state already has in place through their own urban search and rescue teams and the National Guard, because we know we're going to have to get out there and check and make sure that everybody is okay. That is our first priority, and that's why we have this multi-agency, federal, state, local effort in place to make sure that they are mapping out where they're going to be able to go. When I talked to our Deputy Federal Coordinating Officer this morning, what he told me is that these teams are going to be assigned directly to local jurisdictions, right? So they can put them and assign them to go search places where they know that their need is, and that way we're not having any gaps in the efforts that we're doing.
The FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell at a news conference at FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. President Joe Biden saying today that he spoke with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis about the federal aid to prepare for and recover from Hurricane Ian. The president also urging those in the storm's path follow the warnings from officials. And the president issuing a warning of his own to oil and gas companies about using the hurricane as a reason to raise the price of fuel.
Yesterday, I spoke with Governor DeSantis for some time. My team has been in constant contact with him from the very beginning, and the mayors of Tampa, St. Pete, and Clearwater. And my message has been absolutely clear: is that that we are on the alert and in action. We've approved every request Florida has made for temporary assistance, emergency assistance, long-term assistance that I've received. We discussed what we've done to prepare for the hurricane. That includes dispatching hundreds of FEMA personnel and activating thousands of National Guard members. I've also developed a search and rescue team and deployed them to multiple federal agencies, and they're already on the ground and ready to help as we speak. FEMA pre-positioned literally millions of liters of water, millions of meals, and hundreds of generators. We have scheduled everything we can possibly do, we think, and so do the mayors and governor, that we've had put up shelters, they're ready. We're not sure exactly where it's going to hit, but we're getting pretty clear exactly where it's going to hit. I made it clear to the governor and the mayors that the federal government is ready to help in every single way possible. And I want to repeat what I said yesterday to the people of Florida. This storm is incredibly dangerous, to state the obvious. It's life-threatening. You should obey all warnings and directions from emergency officials. Don't take anything for granted. Use their judgment, not yours. Evacuate when ordered. Be prepared. The storm warnings are real. The evacuation notices are real. The danger is real. And when the storm passes, the federal government's going to be there to help you recover. We'll be there to help you clean up and rebuild, to help you get Florida get moving again. And we'll be there at every step of the way. That's my absolute commitment to the people of the state of Florida. And if you forgive me, I want to add one more warning. That's warning to the oil and gas industry executives. Do not, let me repeat, do not use this as an excuse to raise gasoline prices or gouge the American people. The price of oil has stayed relatively low. It kept going down. The price of gas should be going down as well. My experts informed me the production of only about 190,000 barrels a day has been impacted by this storm thus far. That's less than 2% of the United States' daily production, impacted for a very short period of time. This small temporary storm impact on oil production provides no excuse for price increases at the pump, none. If gas companies try to use this storm to raise prices at the pump, I will ask officials to look into whether price gouging is going on. America is watching. The industry should do the right thing.
President Joe Biden today at the Ronald Reagan International Trade Center building in Washington. It was the start of his White House conference on hunger. We'll have more from him on that later in this program. AAA says that gas prices in the U.S. rose a nickel over the past week. The national average now $3.72 a gallon. And as the president said that the government will be there for the people of Florida as they recover from this hurricane, there is a list at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, a government agency, at their website of the costliest hurricanes in the United States, the recovery costs. And in 2022 adjusted dollars, it's Hurricane Katrina, 2005, that's on top, $186 billion. Second is Hurricane Harvey from 2017, $148 billion. The U.S. Senate chaplain, retired Navy Rear Admiral Barry Black, opened today's Senate session with a prayer for those facing the hurricane.
Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, as Hurricane Ian wreaks havoc, protect those in harm's way. Lord, we thank you that the winds and the waves obey your will. Today, make us aware of our need for your presence and empower us to reach out to others in your name.
The Senate chaplain Barry Black opening today's session. An article at USA Today on the hurricane begins, "When Waffle House closes, you know it's going to be bad." The article goes on, the popular restaurant chain known for its waffles and smothered hash browns rarely closes its doors, often providing food and resources to first responders during natural disasters. But every so often, like Wednesday in Florida, the weather is just too dangerous. The Waffle House Vice President of Public Relations telling USA Today we do have closures and mandatory evacuation zones in areas within low-lying areas that are subject to severe flooding. This is Washington Today. Back to the U.S. Senate, that is on a path to pass a short-term federal government spending bill and avoid a shutdown this weekend. Senators advancing what is known as a CR, or continuing resolution, Tuesday night in a procedural vote. It needed at least 60 votes. It got 72, including some Republicans, to get over that mark. That happened after Democratic Senator Joe Manchin requested that his energy project permitting reform bill, which had been attached to the CR, which Senate Republicans objected to, was removed from the CR. Today, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying that it is clear that the federal government will stay open.
Last night, by a vote of 72 to 23, the Senate agreed to advance a shell for a continuing resolution to keep the government open until December 16th and avoid a needless government shutdown. As my colleagues know, government funding runs out Friday at midnight, whereupon a partial shutdown would begin if we do not act. We must work fast to finish the process here on the floor, send a CR to the House, and then send it to the President's desk before the clock runs out. With cooperation from our Republican colleagues, the Senate can finish its work of keeping the government open as soon as tomorrow. There is every reason in the world to get to yes, and I would look forward to working with Leader McConnell to make sure we can do that and not bump up into the Friday midnight deadline. I urge my colleagues on both sides to work with us together to speed this process as quickly as we can through the floor, especially since the CR contains many things both parties support. I'm talking about billions in disaster aid to help communities in Kentucky, Louisiana, Alabama, Texas, Alaska, and Puerto Rico battered by floods and disasters over the past year, as well as help for New Mexico to recover from its worst wildfire in state history. We must also renew the FDA user fees for the next 5 years to prevent the slowdown of the review of innovative drugs and medical devices so needed by our people, and prevent thousands of workers, good, hard-working workers who help approve these drugs and make sure they're safe, from being furloughed. And crucially, we must also approve critical emergency aid for the people of Ukraine. Over the past few weeks, it's become clear that U.S. assistance has made an enormous difference in helping Ukraine defend itself. I want to salute President Biden. He's done a masterful job in helping the Ukrainians and leading us. But the Congress, in a bipartisan way, has gone along in the past with you, not only gone along, enthusiastically supported help for Ukraine. I certainly enthusiastically support it, and we have to continue.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor today. The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell also recounting what happened in Tuesday's vote on that government funding measure.
The path to keeping the government open and funded has been clear for weeks now. The solution was always going to be a clean, bipartisan, continuing resolution negotiated by Senators Shelby and Leahy without any unrelated partisan language jammed in. Our Democratic colleagues tried to complicate things by jamming in a phony partisan fig leaf on the subject of permitting reform. Republicans strongly support real, substantive permitting reform. We're actually leading that charge. Senator Capito has an outstanding bill that would make significant changes to make it easier to build things in our country, create jobs in our country, and unleash domestic energy in our country. The problem was that the Schumer-Manchin language was not actual permitting reform by any stretch. It was a phony fig leaf. It was designed to create the illusion of progress while sapping the political will to tackle the issue in any meaningful way. The Democrats carefully tailored the bill to avoid making any impactful changes to permitting laws. In fact, we had panicked state-level elected officials from around the country writing the Senate to explain how the Democrats' bill would actually make existing problems even worse. Fortunately, the Senate saw through the political game. The phony fig leaf didn't have the votes. So I'm glad that our colleagues capitulated and abandoned their phony fig leaf. I look forward to a bipartisan government funding bill coming to the floor this week, and I hope our Democratic colleagues will push the liberal special interests aside and let actual robust permitting reform become law someday soon.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor today. As Senator Schumer mentioned, we heard him a moment ago, the CR would fund the government from the start of the new fiscal year, Saturday, October 1st, through December 16th. If it passes the Senate, it would also need to pass the House this week before it could be signed into law to avoid that shutdown. The House Republican whip, Steve Scalise from Louisiana, sending a memo to other House Republican members urging a no vote on the CR. He writes, the Democratic majority has refused to negotiate with Appropriations Committee Ranking Member Kay Granger or any other House Republican leader on pressing issues related to our government funding priorities, including runaway inflation, the supply chain crisis, the border crisis, or the opioid deaths associated with drugs like fentanyl coming across our open southern border, and have instead decided to kick the can to December, setting up another government funding showdown during the unaccountable lame duck period. That part of the memo from the House Republican whip Steve Scalise, the lame duck period, referring to the part after the November elections before the new Congress is sworn in. But, well, unlike the Senate, passage in the U.S. House will take only a simple majority, and the Democrats have a slim majority. Also, the White House says that President Biden supports this temporary funding bill, even though it does not include his request for coronavirus and monkeypox response funding. Wall Street today, the Dow up 548 points, snapping a 6-day losing streak. Nasdaq up 222, S&P up 71. New Centers for Disease Control and Prevention study shows that people who are eligible for a monkeypox vaccine but did not receive one were about 14 times more likely to become infected than those who were vaccinated. The data comes from 32 states, involves people who received a single dose of the vaccine rather than the recommended 2 doses. The U.S. currently has over 25,000 confirmed cases of monkeypox. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Thursday on C-SPAN Radio at 10 a.m. Eastern, Colette Peters, the new director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, testifies before the Senate Judiciary Committee about calls for greater transparency, safety, and accountability in the federal prison system. Listen on the free C-SPAN Now app or tell your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts or on the C-SPAN Now mobile video app. President Joe Biden saying the U.S. should have the goal of ending hunger by the year 2030. He says it's something for the whole country to work on together. The president also announcing $8 billion in public and private sector commitments to help end hunger. All part of today's White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health, the first such conference since 1969.
It's been over 50 years, to state the obvious. You all know it well, since President Nixon convened the original White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. And that single conference and the laws that inspired led to transformational change that has helped millions of Americans live healthier lives for generations. Since that time, advances in research and medicine have taught us so much more about nutrition and health. And today, I'm convening this conference again because I believe we can use these advances to do even more to make America stronger and a healthier nation. And so many of you know so much about this as well, and you're committed. And I want to thank all of you here for including bipartisan elected officials like Representative Governor, Senator Braun, Senator Booker, Representative Jackie. Are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here, to help make this a reality. And thanks to Senator Stabenow, Representative DeLauro for their leadership. And here today we have advocates and activists, Jose Andres. You heard of him, haven't you? Last time we hung out on the Ukrainian border in Poland. And leaders of business, labor, agriculture, faith, and philanthropy. And to achieve ambitious goals that I know we can do if we work together. I really do know we can do this. end hunger in this country by the year 2030 and lower the toll that diet-related diseases takes on for too many Americans. This goal is within our reach.
President Biden at the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. It was held at the Ronald Reagan International Trade Center in Washington, D.C. More on this conference with Meredith Lee Hill, Politico's food and agriculture policy reporter, joining us now by phone. Thank you so much. The headline on your article at Politico.com, Biden's hunger and nutrition goals confront November realities. What realities are mentioned?
Well, thanks for having me. And I guess as we mentioned in the article, the president has put out a wide-ranging plan to tackle hunger, specifically end hunger by 2030, and reduce diet-related diseases by then. It's something that obviously is a huge undertaking. It became quite clear during the pandemic, especially, that diet-related diseases and hunger are really pressing on Americans and worsening our health. And so the president unveiled this large plan, but a lot of the kind of major pieces of it, in addition to a lot of the executive actions that he's able to do, a lot of it does rest on Congress in order to move, big programs forward. Things like federal nutrition programs, money for school meals, other just really big legislation has to be moved by Congress. And it's not clear right now. Republicans were not happy about how this conference came together. They're not super happy about the list of some of these targets. And so it's unclear, especially as Republicans are likely poised to take the House in November. It's unclear if there's any traction that can come out of this for legislation in the months ahead and even in the next Congress.
What is in the plan? How would the president get to this goal of ending hunger by 2030?
Well, the plan has a couple of different components. The first chunk is what he can do by executive action, by administrative actions. And there were a number of efforts rolled out today, including the FDA updating essentially what food companies can describe as healthy on their labels, in an effort basically to promote healthier eating among Americans and basically make sure that they know what they're eating, especially in processed foods. And so that was a big step forward. There are a couple of other things that the president is doing, kind of taking a slew of actions around really trying to have the federal government coordinate across, 20 or more agencies to really screen for food insecurity as a whole going forward. And also to incorporate more of these agencies, like the Department of Defense, Department of Education, incorporating them into the work of the Agriculture Department of Health and Human Services on food nutrition issues, really bring a whole of government approach to this. That is as one part of the plan he put forward. But the other chunk of this plan is what he's calling for Congress to do. And as I mentioned, that ranges from everything from school meals, funding for that, to funding for federal nutrition programs, increasing access to those programs going forward, to passing an extended child tax credit, which Democrats have been trying to do, and really push forward a broad increase in federal nutrition programs, but also just a safety net in general. White House officials and the president himself made the point that is really what's going to tackle issues around hunger, poverty, and diet-related diseases and health disparities going forward. And just the very last piece of the plan includes what the private sector can do. And so the president really called on private companies, everyone from corporations to small companies, including nonprofit groups, to really help move forward a lot of investment, but also a lot of volunteers and mobilization around these issues. And so what the White House announced today was $8 billion in basically private sector money that was put forward to help tackle this plan. And that's a big investment. We'll obviously have to see if it all comes through in the coming years, but that is something that the White House is very encouraged by.
We're talking with Meredith Lee Hill, reporter with Politico. In terms of numbers, did the White House have an estimate of how much the plan would cost to end hunger? And also, is there an estimate of what percentage of people in the United States are food insecure that would be addressed?
So the White House, I think, as a matter of probably messaging, did not put a dollar amount behind this plan because it is so wide-ranging. It is likely to be, in the range of we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars going forward on all these different kinds of investments. But I guess most importantly, we did ask Biden administration officials if they had an estimate of the federal funds that the president was unlocking from his executive actions that he is taking from this plan, and they didn't have a response for that. So that is notable. But going forward, we are talking about looking at very broad increases of investments to tackle some of these issues. And I will say, when you mentioned some of the hard numbers here, one thing that they do want to increase access for is by 2030 or a few years after, they want to include 9 million more children in access to free school meals, which would be a substantial increase and also something that Congress has over the past few months and is still trying to work through whether to continue funding like that. So that is something to watch going forward.
Meredith Lee Hill, Politico's food and agriculture policy reporter. Find her stories at Politico.com, and on Twitter, it's Meredith L. Lee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And at this White House conference on hunger, President Biden making some news not related to the topic of the conference. He was recognizing members of Congress who were involved in the issue, and he, as Bloomberg News reports it, called out a recently deceased congresswoman in remarks at a hunger conference she helped organize, addressing the lawmaker as if she were still alive.
I want to thank all of you here for including bipartisan elected officials like Representative Governor, Senator Braun, Senator Booker, Representative Jackie. Are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here to help make this a reality.
President Biden at the conference referring to the late Congresswoman Jackie Walorski, Republican from Indiana, who died in a car accident last month along with two of her staffers. This came up later in the day at the White House Press Secretary's news conference. Questions to Karine Jean-Pierre.
What happened in the hunger event today? The president appeared to look around the room for an audience member, a member of Congress who passed away last month. He seemed to indicate she might be in the room. What happened?
So the president was, as you all know, you guys were watching today's event, a very important event on food insecurity. The president was naming the congressional champions on this issue and was acknowledging her incredible work. He had already planned to welcome the Congresswoman's family to the White House on Friday. There will be a bill signing in her honor this coming Friday. So, of course, she was on his mind. She was of top of mind for the president. He very much looks forward to discussing her remarkable legacy of public service with them when he sees her family this coming Friday.
He said, "Jackie, are you here? Where's Jackie? She must not be here."
No, I totally understand. I just explained she was on top of mind. This wasn't what we were able to witness today, and what the president was able to lift up in this at this conference, at this event, was how her focus on wanting to combat food insecurity in America, and this is something that he was lifting up and honoring. And again, he knows that he's going to see her family this coming Friday. There's a bill signing that's going to happen in renaming a VA clinic in Indiana after the late Congresswoman. He knows that he is going to see her family, and she was at top of mind.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre taking reporters' questions. When Congresswoman Jackie Walorski died last month, the president issued a statement saying that both he and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden were shocked and saddened by her passing. The White House also flew flags at half-staff in honor of her. And Congresswoman Jackie Walorski was co-chair of the House Hunger Caucus and a co-sponsor of the bill that created today's White House Hunger Conference, where the president spoke. Now to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. RIA Novosti, a Russian state-owned news agency, reporting that 4 regions of Ukraine occupied by the Russian military have voted overwhelmingly to become part of Russia. Donetsk, 99%. Luhansk, 98%. Zaporizhia, 93%. And Kherson, 87%. U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price today saying the U.S. will not recognize these referenda as legitimate.
Russia has now announced the pre-baked results of its sham referenda. These results were concocted in Moscow, not collected in Ukraine. Let's be clear. The results are completely fabricated and do not reflect the will of the people of Ukraine. This is the will of Moscow, not the free will of Ukraine or its people. Because we've seen this movie before, we know what will come next. We expect Russia to use these sham referenda as a false pretext to attempt to annex Ukraine's territory. But no matter what President Putin and his enablers try to claim, these areas are and will remain part of Ukraine. Ukraine has every right to continue to defend its sovereignty and its territorial integrity. The United States will never recognize Russia's attempts to annex parts of Ukraine. Quite the opposite. We will continue to work with allies and partners to bring even more pressure on Russia and the individuals and entities that are helping support its attempted land grab.
The State Department spokesman Ned Price opening up his briefing with reporters today. During the Q&A, he answered a question about an alert from the U.S. Embassy in Russia urging Americans in Russia to leave the country and warning U.S. citizens not to travel there. One of the reasons, the possibility that dual nationals may be conscripted into the Russian military.
The U.S. Embassy in Moscow warned American citizens that Russia may not recognize dual nationality when it comes to mass mobilization and conscription. And I'm just wondering whether you've seen evidence that this is occurring, that Americans are being conscripted or being denied consular access.
Our embassy in Moscow did issue a security alert last night, Washington time, Eastern time at least, notified U.S. citizens about Russia's mobilization of Russia's citizens to the armed forces in support of its invasion in Ukraine. Of course, we are concerned about potential implications for dual U.S.-Russian nationals. We're not yet aware of any reports of dual U.S.-Russian nationals who have been called or conscripted into service as a result of this. But the security alert that you saw last night was triggered primarily by President Putin's so-called partial mobilization, the 300,000 additional Russian citizens who President Putin is seeking to enlist in his brutal war in Ukraine. A consequence of that mobilization is, one, the possibility of conscription of dual nationals, in this case dual U.S.-Russian nationals. But as we've seen, this call for a partial mobilization has also engendered protests across Russia. And of course, we have a concern that any Americans could be caught up in such acts. They could be specifically targeted. We've previously made clear our concerns that Americans have been specifically targeted because of their American nationality by Russian security officials. So that too is a concern, but we are not yet aware of any Americans who have been arrested as part of the demonstrations in response to the partial mobilization.
State Department spokesman Ned Price. From the New York Times, the leaks in the Nord Stream gas pipelines under the Baltic Sea resulted from a deliberate act, the European Union's top diplomat said on Wednesday, joining a growing chorus of European leaders in speaking of sabotage. Brussels would support an investigation, he said, and would take further steps to increase our resilience in energy security. The Nord Stream gas pipelines running from Russia to Europe. In Washington, the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee holding a hearing about prosecuting war crimes. One of the witnesses, Eli Rosenblum, Justice Department War Crimes Accountability Counselor, urging the closing of what he said were major gaps in U.S. war crimes laws that make it hard for the U.S. to prosecute non-U.S. citizens. He said closing those gaps would allow for U.S. prosecution of possible Russian human rights crimes in Ukraine. C-SPAN covered this hearing. You can find the full video at cspan.org. A second witness, Andre Watson, Homeland Security Department Assistant Director for National Security, asked about war crime suspects in the United States, perhaps a few thousand of them. The question coming from the committee chair, Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois.
We have evidence that the Department of Homeland Security is currently pursuing more than 1,700 leads of perpetrators of war crimes and crimes against humanity and other human rights violations from approximately 75 different countries, 1,700 leads of people who are living right here in the United States. These are the known leads. The actual number may be just even higher. When the Department of Homeland Security discovers a perpetrator here in the United States, what options does it have for ensuring that that perpetrator will not enjoy safe haven status in our country?
We have numerous options available that will begin with our Human Rights Violators and Coordination Center. So our investigative support teams, as well as our human rights targeting tracking teams, will commence research through open source as well as databases and sometimes classified holdings to develop a crime pattern as it relates to a region, and then from there, people that are associated with those crime patterns. After those folks are identified, we then work to prepare a package, an investigative referral that can be then sent to HSI field offices for coordination with the U.S. Attorney's Office or the ICE Office of the Principal Legal Advisor to confirm if there are criminal options available on the table, and if there are no criminal options on the table, then to explore the possibility of administrative options that may be available to facilitate that person's apprehension.
But let me get, Mr. Watson, I'm out of time. I want to ask this one question. If you have 1,700 leads, why have we not heard of more prosecutions? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The investigations take time because more often than not, it requires an extensive workup. Most of these events occur over a period of time, and the challenge is that, one, we have to identify and locate witnesses, and sometimes those witnesses are OCONUS, outside of the United States. So we'll have our regional support teams and field agents that will need to travel, conduct interviews, gather evidence, and then from there present that evidentiary material and or witness findings to an assistant United States attorney for determination as to whether or not criminal charges are viable. With that being said, that sometimes can be the delay in, one, conducting the investigations and or two, initiating appropriate administrative proceedings.
I would just close by saying our credibility on this issue depends on results.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, chair of the Judiciary Committee, questioning Andre Watson, Homeland Security Department Assistant Director for National Security, at today's hearing on war crimes. Story from CBS News. Bill Plante, one of the longest-serving White House broadcast journalists in history, died of respiratory failure on Wednesday, according to his family. The award-winning CBS correspondent was 84 years old and lived in Washington, D.C. Plante retired from CBS News as senior White House correspondent in 2016 after 52 years with the news division. He served 4 tours in Vietnam with award-winning reporting on the fall of Saigon and Cambodia, covered the civil rights movement, all the presidential elections from 1968 to 2016, and was the anchor of the CBS Sunday Night News from 1988 to 1995. That reporting from CBS News. Bill Plante was on C-SPAN's Washington Journal morning program in 2013 talking about presidential news conferences.
What makes a good question? And I know the answer may depend on who the president is, but what are you looking for and how do you frame your questions?
Well, you want to ask a question that is straightforward enough that it will get an answer. If you frame a question so that it comes in several parts, then the president can always answer one part but not another. And in any case, any politician has learned by the time he gets to be president how to answer whatever he wants to answer rather than the question that was asked. So you try to frame a question that is straightforward and simple, that doesn't have any possibility of going off in some other direction.
Former CBS News White House correspondent Bill Plante on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program in 2013. He has passed away, according to his family, at the age of 84. He was CBS News correspondent for 35 years during the administrations of Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, and he covered the State Department during the administration of George H.W. Bush. The tributes coming in, this from Mark Knoller, former CBS Radio White House correspondent. So sad to learn of the passing of my longtime colleague, Bill Plante. It was my privilege to work side by side with him in the CBS News booth in the White House for some 25 years. He was one of the best in the business. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get more of Washington's top stories sent to you every day. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.